Good evening, everyone. My name is Ravi Ramamurti. I'm a professor of international business and strategy at the Wickham School of Business and the founding director of the Center for Emerging Markets. It's wonderful to have all of you. Thank you for coming. Our topic today, as you know, is India's growing role on the world stage. And we have two distinguished guests to help us explore that topic. This, for those of you who are familiar with our activities, we've done a series of events focused on India, thanks to the Vivek and Vandana Sharma gift to the Center for Emerging Markets. And this is, I think, one of our most important events because we've never had two people at the same time, and also two people who have really done so much to transform India. And I want to get directly into the discussion of the topic. I will talk to both of them. They will talk to each other. We'll have a conversation for a while. And then we want to open it up to questions from the audience. So please start thinking about any questions you'd like to ask our speakers. I'm not going to give a long introduction of our speakers. You've probably seen their bios. But let me just say that I saw a video in which Amitabh, you said that if you had to live life all over again, you would not go to the government, but you would be an entrepreneur. And I wanted to say, gosh, I'm not so sure if that would have been a good thing, because you've been an entrepreneur inside the government. And now usually we think of this as a contradictory oxymoron. How can you be a government entrepreneur? But to actually, in my own research, I published a paper 40 years ago called The Public Entrepreneur. Who are they and how do they operate? Because I had seen even back then some outstanding people working in the public sector for a whole bunch of reasons. Either because they couldn't get into the private sector, they didn't have the right connections, or they wanted to do things on a scale that they couldn't do in the private sector. And so when I look back at all the things you've accomplished in the government, I think you're an entrepreneur pretending to be a bureaucrat. Rather than, people think of you as a bureaucrat, but I don't really think that quite describes you. Sharad is another interesting individual. Started out in the private sector, started a company, sold it. I think it was acquired or became part of which company? Cisco? Yeah, part of Cisco. Then he was a technology leader within several US companies. Yahoo, AT&T, Lucent, and a whole bunch of other companies. Then he became an angel investor, and right now he's really, I think of him as the digital whisperer. He goes around whispering ideas to important people in India, and through them gets reforms enacted. And I think, Sharad, your deep knowledge of the technology, your understanding how the whole system evolved over so many years and all the different models, I think has informed what you have been able to bring into the conversation in India and to really lead to new kinds of innovative practices. But I think India is in some ways at the cutting edge globally. So it's wonderful to have both of you. Amitabh, I'm going to start with you. I don't know where to start because you, among other things in your career, were the head of or the CEO of an organization called Niti Aayog, which used to be the Planning Commission when I worked in it in 1974, but it completely transformed into a think tank, as I understand it. And then in your role as Secretary for the Department of Industry, you also led many initiatives. And I'm thinking of the Make in India program, the Startup India Initiative, Digital India Initiative, the Make India an Easier Place to Do Business. I mean, I can go on and on. But I want to start with the last thing you worked on, which is the G20. Last year, India had the presidency of the G20. And tell us about what that entailed, and tell us about how did India use that opportunity and to really, getting back to our theme, which is India's growing stature on the world stage, how did the G20 event and the summit in New Delhi help move that idea forward?
So Ravi, let me first thank you for organizing this in this wonderful campus with such a lively audience here, and truly delighted to interact with you. So G20, let me say, is firstly very important because it accounts for about 85% of the global GDP. It accounts for about almost 80% of the global trade. It was important for India because when India took over the presidency, there were several challenges. It was the post-COVID era. Vast segment of the population had gone below poverty line. A huge number of people had lost their jobs. There was a global debt crisis. 90 countries in the world were facing a debt crisis. There was a challenge of climate action and climate finance. And on top of all that, we had a huge Russia-Ukraine crisis which was going on for about a year. Now, multilateralism works when you are able to arrive at a consensus on all issues. Without a consensus, it's a failure. And that's what's happening in the United Nations. The United Nations is deadlocked on all key issues of the world. The only institution which is driving consensus is the G20. And therefore, in the midst of the challenge, India had taken upon itself to be very ambitious, very action-oriented, to be very inclusive, to be decisive, and to bring consensus on a range of issues. And the issues were to really accelerate the pace of sustainable and inclusive growth in the world, to accelerate in the post-COVID era, ensure that we are able to arrive at an action plan on sustainable development goals, to ensure that we are able to push the pace of climate action and climate finance. And both SDG and climate action required us to restructure the multilateral financial institutions so that resources could flow to the global south. And then we had also taken up an ambitious agenda of tech transformation and the digital public infrastructure, which were very critical because India's own experience had shown that digital public infrastructure was the key to bringing in radical transformation in many of the countries of the global south. And the Prime Minister was keen to push for women-led development. Now, to bring out a consensus on all these issues was very, very challenging, particularly on climate action, climate finance, to bring a consensus on several of these issues. So India, the key challenge was consensus on a range of issues with 20 countries, each with a differing stand on many of these issues. Now, we had 83 paras on the leader's statement of Delhi, and India was able to straddle the world of advanced G7 countries, of all the emerging markets, Russia, China, and bring a consensus on every key issue confronting the world. And we were able to bring consensus in addition to all these key issues of development, climate action, etc. And on Russia, Ukraine issue on which the United Nations had totally failed. And that one particular paragraph took us about 300 hours of negotiation. We went through about 250 rounds of bilateral discussions. We failed in 16 drafts. And finally, the 17th draft, we succeeded. And that was really challenging. We had to take a lot of bold, aggressive stance. There was a lot of brinkmanship. There was a lot of risky negotiations. But eventually, India could fix the consensus on just about all key issues confronting the world. And that, I think, really demonstrated India's great ability to play a key role on the global agenda.
What were the sticky issues and how did you get around them?
So, well, first of all, let me touch the Russia-Ukraine issue, and you asked me how did you get around them. So, on the Russia-Ukraine issue, it was impossible to bring consensus because we had a fractured paragraph from the Bali, which had actually collapsed in the very first meeting during our G20 presidency. So we had about 16 ministerials. All the 16 ministerials had failed. And everybody expected that India's G20 presidency will be a failure. But we started negotiating. We firstly took all the Sherpas. Sherpas negotiate on behalf of the leaders. So we took them 70 kilometers away from Delhi in a place called IDC Classic in the new district of Gurgaon. And we did not allow any media to get in. We locked up the Sherpas. When we started negotiation, it's 20 screens with 20 Sherpas. And we started, we had a very heated sofa talk, which is an informal negotiation. And then I took them inside the room and we started dictating the para one by one. And I dictated the first para on the basic principles of bringing in that there should be territorial integrity, there should be political sovereignty, there should be no use of nuclear war. I dictated the principles. And then I asked every Sherpa to chip in. But every draft, there was a different perception from Russia or China or from other. And within the G7 also, there were different stances. So it kept on. And we had 8 or 9 days, 8.5 days of very hard-headed negotiations. And as I said, 16 drafts failed. And eventually at the 17th draft, by that time we had done so many bilaterals that we knew everybody's red line. And finally, the leaders had started coming in, and then we gave them the final last draft. And we said, at that stage, I said that I've heard everyone, I know everybody's red line. This is the final draft. You either take it or lump it, and I will not negotiate any further. But if anybody has a challenge, please go and discuss. Ask your leader to discuss with my Prime Minister, who's the leader, and I've shown it to my leader, and who feels that this is a very good draft. But I got all the emerging markets together. The Brazilian Sherpa said this is the best draft. I've shown it to Lula. And the South African Sherpa said that he's shown it to his leader. And I also said that if G20 does not arrive at a consensus, India will not work with G20 anymore. We'll work with IPSA and we'll work with BRIC. We just threatened the hell out of them. And I gave them 3 hours time. And, as soon as the 3 hours finished, I had a yes from Italy, from France, from Germany. Russia was not agreeing, so we had to negotiate at the highest level with Russia with the minister and with Mr. Lavrov. And we had to tell them, if you don't accept it, we'll make it 19-1. And if you don't accept it, then we'll get, we had not yielded to pressure from G7 that to invite Mr. Zelensky, but we had to tell the Russians that we'll get Zelensky to speak right after our Prime Minister had spoken. And within 15 minutes of that, we got the consent of Russia. And next day morning, we had a huge challenge, because we got consent from all G7 except America. And Americans, when I talked to the American Sherpa in the morning, he said, we are discussing with the President Biden. But his Sherpa then after 15 minutes called me and said that we'll agree to this text because all emerging markets are together. All of them were with us, all 9 emerging markets were with us together. He said, we'll accept it, we have 2 conditions. One is we need change in 1 word. And secondly, we need the consent of Russia and China together. And the Russians had agreed with us the previous night under pressure. But he said, we want the consent, written consent of China. And then I talked to the Chinese Sherpa, who said that we have no problem with this draft, but we want something which we had agreed to. We want a change in that. I said, if that para is already greened, I can't change it now. So he said, no, my Prime Minister is not agreeing to it. The Prime Minister was leading their delegation. I said, what is it? He said that the Americans want the G20 to be held in 2026, but we want that para to be withdrawn. So I said, why? So he said, because the Americans, the Prime Minister said that the Americans don't issue visas to Chinese, they don't issue visas to our governor from Hong Kong. Now, those are bilateral issues, but they were fixing it on the multilateral forum. So the meeting of the leaders started, and then I took the American Sherpa and the Chinese Sherpa to the neighboring room, and for 2.5 hours we negotiated. They wanted a written guarantee from the Americans. Finally, I just said that we'll give instead of the word guarantee, we'll ensure the word ensure. So finally, after 2.5 hours of negotiation, we found a way out, and we clinched the issue. And then at about 1 o'clock, I told the Prime Minister that the issue has been clinched, and we announced that we've arrived at consensus. But that's how we clinched the Russia-Ukraine thing. But we had huge challenges on climate, we had huge challenges on energy transition, and we were able to bring a consensus after all ministerials had failed.
Amazing.
So it was quite a thriller.
Yeah. You just don't take no for an answer.
The rest of the story I'll tell you when I write my book.
Yeah. Now, President Xi did not attend the summit.
Yeah.
Did that have any implications?
No, thank God he didn't attend it. Because in Indonesia he attended, when he came down and attended it, he had a bilateral meeting with President Biden. And the attention was on the meeting between Xi Jinping and Mr. Biden, and not on the G20. Whereas in India, because Xi Jinping didn't come, the entire focus was on G20 and on President Modi. That was a good thing. And I think good that he didn't come.
Okay. Now, your trip here to the US is actually to speak at the United Nations on Thursday on some of the innovations that India has come up with in digital. Tell us a bit about what you plan to say there.
So, one of the key things we did in G20 was that we got the principle of digital public infrastructure, the definition, the framework accepted by all the G20 countries. There was no definition, there was no framework earlier. India has done stellar work and really path-breaking work. And the path-breaking work is that in India, we've created a digital identity for all Indians. And during 2015 and 2017, we opened up 520 million bank accounts. And then we, through a major drive, we linked up the digital identity and the mobile number with that bank account. And that led to digital fast payments in India. And all Indians do fast payments on their mobile. We do debit, credit directly from the bank using the mobile. Everything is interoperable through the banks. You don't put money in a wallet. Nobody in India goes to a physical bank. Nobody uses a checkbook. I have not been to a bank. I have not used my checkbook. I have not used my debit credit card for last 4.5 years. And I have not been to an ATM machine for 4.5 years now. The only time I've used my credit card is when I came to the United States of America and I had to hire an Uber vehicle to meet my daughter in San Francisco. Yeah. So nobody uses this. Everybody uses mobile is the virtual bank. But as a consequence of this fast payment, now we do 46% of the real-time fast payments in the world. Last year we did about 130 billion transactions. But as a consequence of this, we have a number of startups who started like MobiKwik, Pine Lab, etc., all unicorns now. They started looking at the payment history and started giving credit. And then you had another set of startups who use this to actually take the stock market to rural areas. So Zerodha, Grow, Upstock, they control 30% of the Indian stock market, took it to and wealth creation to rural areas. And therefore, that was another step. And then you have a number of other Indian startups like GoDigit, Acco, who took insurance to the rural areas. And you can do everything you do from fast payment to credit to stock market to insurance. We do in 30 seconds to 1 minute on the mobile. This doesn't happen anywhere in the world. The broad principles that we followed is that it's open source, it's open API, it's globally interoperable. So you can do your fast payment from Paris, from Singapore, from Mozambique, from Angola, all these countries who operate UPI. And it's open source, open API, it's globally interoperable. And the key here is that this model is very different from the big tech model of USA, because all innovation in USA in the last 2 decades have been carried out by Google, Meta, Apple, Amazon, and in China by Tencent and Alibaba. But the data is owned by the service providers. The data fiduciary are these companies. Whereas in the Indian model, the heart of the issue is that the data is owned by the citizen. The citizen owns the data. And he gives a techno-legal clearance to the account aggregator to share his data for that particular transaction to the service provider. So that's the transformational work which India has done. It's made it interoperable, it's open source, and it's at the heart of the issue is that it's citizens' data owned by the citizen. So it's a technological leapfrogging, and to our mind, this is the way the world will move. Because if you look at the world, there are 4 billion people without, and this model, we used it very effectively during the COVID. We could do 2.2 billion COVID vaccination without any paperwork. In United States, all of you were issuing papers, but in India, there was no paperwork. It was all digital. And during the COVID period, we didn't give a large package like United States, which led to inflation and which impacted other countries, but we put money into the bank accounts of 800 million Indians without any leakage. And we put money into 110 million women's bank account without any leakage. And today, in 650 schemes of the government, we put money straight into the bank account of Indians without any leakage straight away into the bank account of the beneficiary. Now, our view is that this is the way forward for the global south, that citizens must own their data. It must be open source so that it will allow private sector to innovate. In India, there's a public interest layer, but on top of it, it's the only place where PhonePe competes with Google Pay in the market space. Paytm competes with Amazon Pay. It's all competition in the marketplace. There's a lot of huge innovation taking place. And that is the way forward for the rest of the world in future. It can't be monopolization of data.
By a few companies, as we have in the US. It's also a lot cheaper than the system that we use in the US.
So all these things have been done to population scale, huge population scale at very low cost. And that is why the World Bank said that in India, the cost of acquisition of a customer fell from $25 to 15 cents. And that is why a company like Reliance Jio came in and could acquire 410 million customers in less than a year, because the cost of acquisition of a customer had radically fallen. There was no paperwork anywhere.
Sharad, I want to bring you in here because you saw this thing actually evolve over a long period of time, and some of the ideas that you brought from your experience have shaped the nature of this India stack. Very quickly, tell us, what is the India stack? What are the elements in that stack? And why is this model better than the models we have, say, in the US or in China?
Yeah. So this is a very different approach from what we use in US and China. The fundamental difference is that the idea here is that private innovation is going to be built on some kind of public technology. And it is the combination of the two. The Indian word is a jugalbandi, a partnership between the two that will solve India's hard problems, right? So this needs regulatory support as well. So you bring that kind of an idea to life. This idea is not a new idea. It is an idea that is used in many other fields. For example, if you look at pharma industry, a lot of public research is the basis on which private innovation happens and molecules emerge and drugs emerge. Many of you here, for example, would have taken an mRNA vaccine that came as a result of NIH-funded research, public research that was then commercialized by some companies, and then that became the mRNA vaccine. But in the digital sector, that wasn't the method that was being followed. And why did that method come about in India is that sometime in 2012, it became clear that we needed to think out of the box to bring financial inclusion to India. And what became a galvanizing problem for us was, could we give a street vendor a loan for a day, in the formal system. So in India, to make it even more, real for us, we took a street vendor in Bangalore, took a picture of her, and we didn't use her real name. We call her Rajni, and we looked at Rajni and said, what will it take for us to give her a loan? Now, as Amitabh pointed out, if you go back to 2012, 2013, she didn't even have a bank account. And why didn't she have a bank account? Because it was too expensive to open a bank account. The know your customer KYC paperwork that was needed would cost 50, 60 rupees. So since an identity system called Aadhaar had already come up, it was possible to conceive of an electronic KYC system that could bring that cost down from 50, 60 rupees to 2 rupees. And now suddenly the banks were willing to open what they regarded as a zero balance account on which they previously were, thought it was going to be losses for them because they would never make money on that account. 60 rupees to open an account that would not generate any income for them. But they were willing to open an account if it cost them only 2 rupees, thinking that one day when Rajni or somebody like that has some more money, they would have a customer. And so we went through this phenomenal expansion of the banking system. But that was conceived as part of this Rajni architecture. The second was if she could have a bank account, right, and she could get a loan from a lender, how would she sign the loan agreement? You remember even today, very often when you are signing something, you need either a dongle, if it's a high value contract, or you do that on DocuSign where everybody is on the same system. So India invented an e-sign protocol which allows people to sign. So if I'm renting something from you, you can use one service provider, I can use another service provider. We don't need to be using the same service provider because the underlying protocol is a public protocol. And India now does 3 times more e-signatures than the US does every year. Oh, wow. Right? And all that, it's again private innovation, but on a public protocol that we have. So, signatures was a solvable thing. Then if you needed to send 400 or 500 rupees to that street vendor because early in the morning, because she would use that money to buy something and let's say buy corn dog and then cook that on the street and then sell it and then return the money in the evening, the money needed to travel to her and travel back to the lender in the evening. The only way to do that at that time was with debit card. And that debit card, Visa and MasterCard used to charge 1% on the way in and 1% on the way out. And we thought to ourselves, this doesn't make sense at all because the money lender charges her 1% a day, which is, by the way, 300% a year, which is a very high amount. And we are trying to disintermediate the Indian money lender. And to disintermediate the Indian money lender and replace it with Visa and MasterCard somehow didn't seem very reasonable. And at that time, there was a conversation that took place with them, and they were very kind, and they said they would charge only half the amount. And so we remember we came back to our offices in Bangalore from this meeting in Mumbai, and we said, should we do it or not? And we thought really hard, and the decision was it just doesn't make sense. And that was the precipitating reason for creating the UPI protocol. UPI protocol is, think of it as a Skype business model. Many of you have used Skype before. Many of you have used Skype for free because only 8% of the Skype users paid for value-added services. So those 8% kept it free for the remaining 92%. UPI is also like that. The basic transactions are free, but the high-value transactions and value-added transactions are paid for, and that allows the system to function. So we got a payment system that is there. Now, if there are 2 Rajnis, one pays on time and one doesn't pay on time, then the one who pays on time should get a cheaper interest rate. But the lender won't give her a cheaper interest rate until she threatens to take her business elsewhere. Now, what is taking your business elsewhere for this kind of lending? Saying that, look, this is the amount of money that I make. This is my track record of paying the daily loans that I have taken. And since this data is mine, I can show it to you in a high provenance fashion. So the account aggregator system came up to enable that to happen. And finally, the only real piece that is left is a revamping of the credit bureau system. RBI has already agreed to implement something called public credit registry, which is to revamp the credit bureau system that we have. It has a new name which was announced in the budget last year. It's now called the National Financial Inclusion Register, and it is going to come either later this year or early next year, and that would then complete the cycle. So what happened was that in 2012, 2013, you can humor me by going to the internet, and if you put in RAJNI, Rajni, and you put iSPIRT, you will see a slide from 2013 on the internet, which has 3 circles in it. Says the innermost circle says what Rajni will do, the middle circle says what the market players will do, and the outer circle has all these building blocks of public technology which are available for market players so that they can innovate much more easily than before. So the model here is that create these building blocks so that combinatorial innovation can happen in the hands of market players so that they can go and solve a problem that it was not possible to solve earlier. So this architecture of innovation, it's an innovation architecture. You know, India brought to life over a period of 10 years. And I think we've been extraordinarily lucky in many ways. One, this very early on became a whole of nation approach. And this meant that we had full buy-in from the government, the regulators to make it happen, from the private players. So public technologists, private innovators, policymakers came together to work on the same architecture across now 3 governments, right? We are talking about 2012, 2013. There was a government then 2014 another government, and now 2019 another government. So across 3 governments, you know, work at it systematically and bring it to life. And now this is being applied to many areas. It is being applied to health. There is something called livestock stack, which is called LifeStack for short. It is to revamp animal husbandry in India. You know, but the innovation model is the same. And that innovation model is definitely relevant to many parts of the world. Global South for sure, but I would argue it is important for Global North as well.
Terrific. I mean, you've created a whole infrastructure,
yes,
which is based on local innovation, but borrowing ideas and experience from other parts of the world. And now you're looking to share this with other countries. But that takes me to something, Amitabh, that you, I believe, are passionate about. And you refer to India's development path as following the third way, meaning not entirely state-led, not entirely market-led, but something else. And this seems to me to capture many of the elements of the third way. You want to say a little bit more about what is the third way?
So, you know, the digital public infrastructure model has a public interest layer. Now, the public interest layer, it's driven by the public, but we call it the public interest layer, on top of which the private sector innovates. You can't have innovation without the private sector. The private sector is the key. You have to create contestable markets. And therefore, the private sector innovates on this. All the work on this, other than the public interest layer, has been done by the private sector. And all these startups I named, from insurance to credit to stock market, all has been done by young startups. I mean, these are all national assets, these startups who've disrupted and taken it forward. And therefore, the third way is that we've not allowed data of the citizens to be controlled or monopolized by either the big tech or by the government. We've said the data of the citizen will be controlled by the citizen himself. And he will actually give permission for the use of his data. He can monetize his own data. And that this is open source, this is open API, this is globally interoperable. And that is the third way. It's very different model from what United States has done, very different from what China has done. And to our mind, this is very different from a government-led model. So this is, to our mind, if 4 billion people in the world do not have a digital identity, 2 billion people do not even have a bank account. If you want to transform lives of citizens across the world, if you want to really make a technological quantum jumping as India has done, like the Bank of International Settlement has said that India achieved the extent of financial inclusion in 7 years, what would have taken it 50 years to achieve. Now 50 years of progress, they said, you've achieved in 7 years' time. And you know, we could bring down the cost of transaction to such low levels as the World Bank has said. And that is why India could really make a, I mean, I remember I was working with fishermen in Kerala, traditional fishermen. I could give them, you know, they were prone to drinking, so I could give them fishing nets, I could give them outboard motors, I could give them fishing crafts. But, you know, since they were prone to drinking, opening a bank account was critical. It used to take me 6 months, 7 months chasing know your customer and bank managers, etc. Today we open a bank account in less than a minute in India through the digital identity. We do a transaction in 30 seconds. I can transfer money from my mobile to your mobile. It's actually money going into your bank account. So, I mean, what India has done is unprecedented. It's a technological marvel in many ways.
You referred to some of the startups, and I want to go there for a bit, because you started up Startup India. What was that like? And can you tell us a bit about what the motivation was?
So, you know, in 2016, we started Startup India, and, you know, we actually made several rounds of presentation to the Prime Minister, and he wanted a whole of government approach. So we had to look at different ministries. We said there will be we had to drive incubations. We had to drive, you know, we then drove the Atal Innovation Mission, which started tinkering labs in schools. We worked on the patent regime to make it very friendly to all the startups, and we had a fast track for them. And then we said that none of these existing rules and regulations, you know, India had built up in the socialistic era of inspectors Raj visiting all these, we did away all that for them. And then we launched it in 2016. January, we had just 156 startups in India. Today we have 125,000 startups in India. We have over 120 startups in India. And they are the ones who are using AI, they are using machine learning, they're doing a lot of disruption. There's a lot of deep tech work going on. We also, at that point of time, started a fund of funds, which was managed by SIDBI, but which enabled VC funds to take a lot of risks, because a part of the risk was borne by the fund of funds. So I think a huge amount of work had been done in the startup. It enabled a lot of, you know, when I was, you said you were an entrepreneur in government. When I was starting my career, there was no option but to join the government. But if I'm given an option now, I'll go and do my own tech startups. That culture for innovation, that culture for disruption did not exist in India, you know, during my time. And you could either join the public sector of India or you could be in the government. But today, all young guys, today, all youngsters are getting into the world of disruption. They are the ones who are really driving change in India. And that's why the government has also opened up the geospatial sector, the space sector, the defense sector, the drone sector, the robotics sector. There are no rules and regulations in these sectors. We allowed all our young people to do disruption and just fly. And that's what's driving India's growth story. It's the young energy of India which is driving it. I mean, phenomenal young energies, because the demographics are so good. I mean, average age of the population is 28. Even when India becomes 100 in 2047, the average age will be 35. So, I mean, they're very low dependency burden. And every young Indian wants to do innovative things. They want to get into, I mean, we've just started this new scheme of drone Didis, that the Prime Minister said that he wants 1 million women who will own drones and make a use the drone to enhance agriculture productivity in India. I just met a drone Didi in Delhi. She's earning 5,000 rupees a day using the drone to assist agriculturalists in the farming sector. So India's innovation sector is just tremendous.
We actually had a summit last year at the center on startups.
Yeah.
And we had some of these startups, including the Pavan Chandana, I think, the Skyroot Aerospace.
Yeah.
Very, very impressive
Phenomenal
stories.
guy.
Yeah. I want to switch gears a little bit, while we still have some time, to get your thoughts on the Make in India story.
Yeah.
That got off to a more slow start, because making in India for India was one thing, but making in India for the world was another thing. And you really needed to do Make in India for the world if you wanted to use that as a way to create lots of jobs. And it also meant you had to go down from the mid-tech to the sort of the labor-intensive assembly type of work. That seems to be getting traction now. So would you comment on how can India really employ its population and be a big player on the global stage without having a vibrant manufacturing sector?
So first of all, my belief is that India can't grow without manufacturing for long periods of time. If you need to grow for 3 decades, you need to grow with creating jobs. You can't do that without manufacturing sector. India has grown on the back of services sector. India needs to fire on all cylinders. India needs to continue growing on services, but it needs to grow on manufacturing and create jobs. India needs to do smart urbanization. And because without urbanization, you'll have very high dependency on agriculture. You need to create good quality jobs for your workers in agriculture sector. And you need to enhance agriculture productivity. So the 40% of your population working in agriculture needs to be taken away from agriculture and put into manufacturing and agriculture jobs. So if you want India, and the challenge for India is if it wants to be a developed country by 2030, you want to be a $30-35 trillion economy, you need to fire on all cylinders. Now, manufacturing Make in India was a little slow because, in India, the British Raj was replaced by License Raj. So you had rules, regulations, procedures, paperwork. You had built up a whole socialistic era of regulations. So just imagine what India has done. It scrapped all these rules, regulations, procedures in center government. It has scrapped 1,700 laws. No country in the world has done this, 1,700 laws. So it focused on ease of doing business first and foremost. Then it improved the patent regime. And then the challenge for India was to be an integral part of the global value chain. It's not Make in India, it's not protectionism. It's about making India easy and simple. It's about attracting foreign direct investment in India. So we opened up the FDI regime. I took about 23 cabinet notes. All of them were approved. And all of them was just to ensure, and today in India, 98% of the FDI comes through the automatic route. You don't need to go to the government for approval. Just inform RBI. And therefore, FDI opening, making India easy, simple, opening up the patent and trademark regime, scrapping laws, all that was a time-taking process. And now we have the production-linked incentive scheme. But we are not doing protectionism like USA is doing through the Inflation Reduction Act or the CHIPS Act. We are saying that India must become a global, a very integral part of global supply chain, and India must make for the world. And we've hugely improved on the logistics side now.
Yeah, I was going to ask you what some of the elements for doing that, like ease of doing business, helps to do that. Even the Startup India initiative helps create a climate to make that all possible. What remains to be done?
I think the next big reform needs to be that while central government has done this, India is a very large country. It's bigger than 25 countries of Europe. So you need states to push for reforms. You need 12 champion states who will grow at 10% plus for the next 3 decades. They need to become easier and simpler than the central government now. So there has to be huge political leadership. There has to be huge administrative will to drive reforms, drive growth in the states. You need the eastern part of India. There's been massive transformation in Uttar Pradesh. But you need Bihar, you need Jharkhand, you need Chhattisgarh, you need Madhya Pradesh, and you need several other states of the western and central part of India to grow rapidly. So the next big story has to be the growth story of the Indian states. We need to make them compete with each other. We need to name and shame them. We need to put their ranking in public domain. and we need to push the states into big growth for the coming years.
And you see that happening?
Yeah, I see that happening.
Is it already happening?
There's a huge, there are at least 11 states who've made a program for making themselves a $1 trillion economy. So if these states, these 11 states become $1 trillion economies, India's on a roll.
Yeah. I'm going to ask Sharad one more question, and then we're going to open it up for questions from the audience. So please get ready, and the mic runners, please get ready. Sharad, I want you to speak to the question of privacy and security, because that's always a big concern. Now, you said the ownership of the data will be with the citizen, and that certainly helps. But the idea of all of this data with the Aadhaar and so on, where does it sit? How is it protected? And what do we do, all the cyber crimes and so on? What's the experience been, and what's the strategy for making all that work properly?
So India is taking an approach, a techno-legal approach, for implementing this idea that the citizen owns his or her own data. And why is this approach important is because, in this kind of a system, the regulation requires coming together of both public technology and public policy. So I had a chance on this table to give an example, which I'll share with you here. So imagine for a moment that, and this is a reality, to come here, I went to Chicago first, but I took a flight from Bangalore to Delhi. I used Digi Yatra. Digi Yatra is a face recognition based system you can use in India for entering the airport, completely paperless, and it works like a charm. Has anybody here used Digi Yatra? Do you like it?
Oh, hello, a lot of people
All right.
here.
Yeah. So now
this is a very tech-savvy group.
Yeah. So, the question is, can the government go to Digi Yatra Foundation and say which are the 5 flights Sharad has taken, or last 10 flights or 15 flights that Sharad has taken? How many of you think the government can query Digi Yatra and get that answer? If you think that is possible, raise your hand. Okay, I see some hands going up. Then imagine at Delhi, at Bangalore airport, I was hungry. I had a snack. I paid for it using UPI. Then I reached Delhi. I bought a book at the airport, using UPI. How many of you think it is possible for NPCI or anybody in the government to know that these 2 back-to-back transactions that Sharad has done on UPI, one was in Bangalore and the other was in Delhi? If you think that is possible, raise your hand. Okay, I see the same gentleman raising his hand. And the third is that, remember, UPI works on my bank account, and I opened the bank account recently using my Aadhaar. So I did a Aadhaar KYC. I not only opened that bank account, but I opened 2 other bank accounts as well. Now, is it possible, or do you think it is possible in India for somebody in the government, Ministry of Finance, RBI, to put in my Aadhaar number and see the list of 3 bank accounts to come up? How many of you think it is possible? Now you are not even raising your hand. Huh? Okay, so the question is, not only does it not happen, it is not even possible to make it happen. Now, why is that the case? Because the way the UPI protocol is designed, it is designed in a way to not allow for, there's no provision in the protocol for location and merchant information to be shared with the settlement agent, in which in this case is NPCI. So even if tomorrow the government wants to know, the protocol doesn't support it. And if you had to support it, then the protocol will need to be changed, and several hundreds of companies will have to adopt the changes, and it cannot be done on the sly. It will be a very public process. Why am I giving this example to you is because this is an example where public technology and public policy work hand in hand together to give you the confidence that your UPI transactions remain completely private. Same is with Digi Yatra. Next time you try this. So in Digi Yatra, I'm purposely giving you these examples to illustrate the point. When you take Digi Yatra, when you are entering the airports, the camera takes a picture of you, then it has to send it to the back end. And it says, hey, this is the signature of Sharad's face. Does it tally with the reference signature that has been stored on the back end? Now, that reference signature is stored in a wallet. But where is the wallet? Do you know the wallet is actually in your phone? So do me a favor next time. When you're using DigiYatra, put your phone on the airplane mode when you're about to enter the airport. And you know what's going to happen? It'll fail. Because that machine in front of you is sending your signature, your live signature, to be checked against a reference signature. And the only place where the reference signature is kept is in a secure wallet in your phone. There is no central location for it at all. Even if the government wanted to do it, they can't do it because there's no central location where it has been stored at all. There is no other system like this in the world. And therefore, everybody wants to copy this system. So privacy by design, it's built into the system as well. So when you do a bank account opening, there is no provision for the Aadhaar number to be stored by the bank. In fact, it's illegal for them to do that. And all that the bank gets is a virtual token which says that on such and such time, Sharad was verified with the Aadhaar system. But that Aadhaar number is not stored with the bank account. So even if the government wants to use my Aadhaar number to find out how many bank accounts I have, it is impossible. So to answer your question, India took a very, very interesting approach to privacy, both by building it into the public technology and building it into the public policy. And the two work hand in hand with each other. So if you want to live in a world where your privacy is secured, that is the place to be in. I'm not joking. Yeah. Now, why is this important? Is because in the Indian system, you can do this without compromising innovation. No, you can have a very private system that doesn't allow companies to innovate on your personal data. Why is your personal data important? Is because if I can give my personal data to the lender, if I can share all my business data with the lender and so does Jay, then it is possible that Jay's business runs much better than mine and he is eligible for a cheaper loan than me. So there is a benefit of sharing personal data. And that sharing happens, however, with consent and only with consent. Whether that is the government on the other side or it's a private party on the other side. So India, therefore, has created a system around personal data which gives you the privacy but also allows for innovation. If you come in the US is a land where you have no privacy but a lot of innovation. If you go to Europe, you have a lot of privacy and no innovation. And if you go to China, what is privacy? So these are the four regimes that are there out in the world. And this is why you hear so many countries interested in taking the India model and applying it within their system as well. Does that answer the
it
question?
does.
Yes.
It also makes me happy because it's a great example of reverse innovation and one that I think many countries can benefit from. So let's open it up to some questions from the audience. We have about 20, 25 minutes. Get a mic here, please. Just tell us very quickly who you are and just straight to the question, if you don't mind.
My name is Saurabh. I work for a pharma company. And Sharad, we were talking about innovation before Amitabh came, and we didn't touch upon AI, particularly Gen AI. And I was thinking about that because Stanford came out of their AI report very recently, and I was looking at that, and India does not show up in terms of innovation. And I was thinking about the tech stack that you refer to, because it should confer certain advantages because we have built a system which is highly scalable and it's interoperable and all that stuff. But yet there's the issue of privacy, which has implications for AI because the citizens own the data. What does that mean for India's ability to innovate on the AI scale?
Yeah.
Are we in a problem because of citizens owning their own data?
Yeah, it's a very good question. So look, there are the India's data system, to get into a little more detail, and you can read about it at depa.world, is actually from 2017, before all this AI stuff became important. But in 2017, what had happened is that there's a very famous paper by Ashish Vaswani called the Transformer paper. Some of you may know about that Transformer paper, had already come out. So the India's data economy is actually built on inference and training. So the inference is that I give my personal data to somebody, like a lender, so that the lender can infer my risk as distinct from Jay's risk, right? So the more data that I can give, the better the inference can be. If I can give all my data to the doctor can infer what's wrong with me. If I can give my data to make my trip, they can recommend a better weekend trip for me than for somebody else whose interests are different, right? So that part of the inference cycle requires you to be able to share personal data, and the trade-off is that in return you get something very personalized, right? That in India is based on a consent-based system. But the person who's making the inference on the other side is an expert. It used to be a human expert, but increasingly will be an AI machine that is there. For that to happen, you need training data sets on the other side, right? You need to be able to give to it everybody's data so that they can look for patterns and determine what's going wrong, right? Now, in India, the unique thing about the Indian system is that for training data sets, India has built a privacy-preserving system which does not require consent at all. Because the purpose of the consent is that since my privacy is going to be compromised, I should, and only I should, determine whether I'm okay with this and therefore I'm willing to give the consent or not. If all our data here can be aggregated in a form and used by a training model in a way that is privacy preserving, then there is no need for consent at all. Only thing the need is that if that model makes a lot of money, then some of the benefits of that money should travel back to the data principals. And that is enforced in an electronic contract system. And this whole regime is called data training. Now, let me see if I can explain it in a very simple way. So let us say there is in India IRCTC, which is the Indian Railways. They have more information about travel than anybody else. And let us say you are Make My Trip. You should invite Make My Trip's Deep Kalra to your conference next night. Sure, and so let's say you have Make My Trip on the other side. Make My Trip said, if only I could look at the IRCTC data, I could recommend better trips to my customers. Is that a fair way to do that? So now they come to, let's say you are Make My Trip, I'm IRCTC, you come to me and say, can you give me an anonymized data set because I'm only looking for patterns of information. I say, sure, but I have an obligation to preserve the privacy of my customers. Now, if you are here in the US, this is what you would do. In the US, I will say, I'll give it to you, provided you don't de-anonymize that data. And if it happens to get de-anonymized in your shop, you will have to pay me $1 billion of a fine, penalty. And then you say, I will sign this contract and operate it in New York law, because New York law is particularly good in dealing with asymmetric contracts because of CDOs, where things are resolved very quickly, and both are on our merry ways, right? I give you anonymized data set, you look after it very carefully, because if you don't, you'll have to pay me $1 billion. Can you do that in India? No. No. Because, even if you take me to court in India, the court case will go on for 20 years. So in India, we had to find an alternative. What is that alternative? We created a park. That park that I'm going to describe to you is called the confidential clean room. Your model and my data go into this common park that is there, right? And all the samyog, we call it, all the training happens. Now you got a trained model. I want to make sure that your model is such that it's not stealing private data. So there is an inspection regime for that model. Not human, completely electronic, with a public protocol that's visible on depa.world. And that uses differential privacy, a branch of mathematics, which is relatively new, from 2006 vintage. So that now gives me a computational guarantee that your model is not stealing my private data. And you get the comfort that your model cannot be stolen by me because I don't control the park. So this allows for this collaboration to happen in a way that is not possible anywhere else in the world. Now, this is not an abstract idea. It was some years back. But today, it is an idea you can, if anybody here into data science or a software engineer, go to depa.world. You will see inference cycle. The protocol of the inference cycle powers account aggregator system that we talked about earlier. And the other side is called DEPA training. That powers this AI training that we talk. And there the principles are listed, and the public technology is there. The code is there. The last place is called Getting Started. You can go to GitHub, kick the tires, and use it tomorrow if you so like. So the Indian policy making is no longer about having the intent, not only not having the principles, but being able to translate those principles in code that can be kicked around by the world's expert on differential privacy. Out of the top 8 experts in differential privacy, we have only 2 in India. But all 8 have looked at it and opined that this computational guarantee is secure. So therefore, no other country has this system today, because in India, this combination of public policy and public technology, people work together for years to bring this to life and make it available to everybody else in the world. So although the Stanford report said India is not going to do well in AI, I will tell you, that report will have the same humbling experience that the McKinsey report of 2012 happened, where they said cloud computing will never go to the enterprises. And they were wrong. They had to eat public humble pie, right? So you will find that to happen. Why? Because AI is, yes, about GPUs, but before you get to the GPUs, it's about data. Today, a Gangaram hospital in India does more liver transplants than all of the east coast of India. The Narayan Hridyalaya in Bangalore does more successful heart transplants and heart surgeries than any other place in the world. Arvind Eye Care does more cataract surgeries than all of UK. So especially, I'm just giving you an example of health. We have that health data. So who's using this DEPA training? The National Cancer Grid of 300 hospitals. And all this health data that we are talking about is being used to make health models in India that will be used for not only public health, but also private health as we go forward. This will bubble up once the success is visible, which will take a year or 2 for it to happen. So India has a game plan for AI. Pay attention to that, and you will find it an attractive place to be in for AI startups. Yeah.
Okay, let's see if we can get another couple of questions before we have to stop. I see a student. Yeah.
Shout out to your question. It's okay.
Hi, I'm Avrat. I'm an undergrad student at Northeastern studying finance and economics. So my question is that in India, I feel that there are 3 issues. One is judicial problems in terms of you have 50 million cases. How do you deal with that? Secondly, malnutrition and stunting, and education at the rural level. How do you feel that India has to tackle these problems? Because human resources is key to all of these success. Like if you don't have a good workforce, a trained workforce, how do you build on that? So how do you think that India should tackle on that going forward?
So may I just answer the second one, and judicial, if you can take. See, first of all, I think some of the data may not be correct, but even given that, there is a case for improving the health of newborn babies, right? Now, what happens today is that if you are a baby who's underweight, the mother gets protein biscuits because she's breastfeeding, and that has a big implication. In about half the states, the actual delivery of the biscuits happen. In the other half of the states, the register says that delivery has happened, but it may not have happened. Are you with me so far? So UP, for example, is piloting the testing of a new UPI feature, which is called e-rupee. Nothing to do with crypto, it's e-RUPI, which is a voucher system based on UPI, where instead of getting the protein biscuit, she gets the money for the protein biscuits that she can redeem in a chemist or a pharmacy to get the protein biscuits. Now, it's possible that she may not buy the protein biscuit and buy chocolate instead. But that is easier leakage to manage than the leakage where, it is eaten up on the inside. So I would say a lot of this reform of benefit delivery that is happening, which you can expand on, is actually making a difference on the ground and will continue to make a difference on the ground. I would also say, look, I am usually not the glass half full guy all the time. But I think our bad judicial system has given the most powerful idea for this generation: techno-legal regulation. Because we know that a judicial system is broken, our contract law doesn't get implemented on time, we were forced to devise an alternative way to ensuring good behavior of the contracting parties. And that has given us this DPI-based techno-legal implementation, which, by the way, is now the biggest reason DPI is traveling to other parts of the world. Because judicial reform is hard. How many countries have the same judicial problem that you have here? And I would submit to you that the trust in the judicial system in the US, if you look over the last 10 years, has fallen dramatically here as well, as it's become more and more politicized. So therefore, you need a system that goes beyond the conventional judicial system to regulate good behavior. And techno-legal is the answer. And if we didn't have a bad judicial system, we wouldn't have stumbled into that idea. So on the whole, I think we are doing okay.
So first, let me say it's a very good question. And these are critical issues for India. And it'll be very difficult for India to grow at rapid rates over a long period of time without improvement in learning outcomes and without improvement in nutritional standards of India. Now, we've implemented this program called the Aspirational Districts of India, which I ran, and which has made a huge difference at grassroots level, because we use the power of data to do good governance. We actually, when I was a collector, it was not possible to get good data, but today it's possible to do it. And we were tracking the performance of 115 of the most backward districts of India on a real-time basis. And we were ranking the districts on their incremental performance, the delta on a month-to-month basis. And we were putting out the data in public domain so that every citizen of those districts could know the performance of that district. And every elected representative could know, the collectors could know. And we created a huge sense of competition. So you have to work against, we have to work with data, you have to work on outcomes, you have to bring in good governance, you have to do a lot of capacity building of the state government officials. That is the key. And in the case of nutrition, you have to use technology to track every single pregnant woman, because a weak mother is giving birth to a stunted or a wasted child. And therefore, from the point of pregnancy to the point of delivery is a very critical period for every woman. And that is what we are now doing through our ASHA workers, tracking them down and actually ensuring that we take care of the child till the first 5 years. Everywhere, now the Women and Child Development Department does this. So we are in that process of transformation, and I think you will see a huge difference. The first challenge for India was to ensure that everybody has access to education, which has now been done. And the next 2 to 3 years, you'll see a huge, huge focus through the new education policy being built on on improving learning outcomes. On the judiciary, it's a very important point that the judicial process takes time, and I think the Chief Justice himself, Mr. Chandrachud, is pushing for a lot of use of technology and artificial intelligence to improve, cut down the time delays, etc. And I think that process is also well underway.
Yeah, the lady in front here. Yeah.
Hello. Should I?
Oh, sorry. I promised the other gentleman, and then we'll get to you.
Thank you.
Please.
My name is Mahesh Pardiwala, and I work in the investment and financial sector. We all who have been here in the US from India for the last 30, 35 years, we have been amazed by its growth and transformation. And, of course, there could be many reasons which could come up for that. But we talk about India becoming number 3 in the world economy, etc. And we should go up to even number 2 or number 1. But US being at 25 trillion, I think, China being at 17, and Germany and Japan at 4 trillion, and India still at 3 trillion. One of the reasons which I think is the low labor participation rate, and especially women. Of course, we all know that why those who are from India, we know why this is a generational thing which has happened for thousands of years, hundreds of years. But we need to transform that. And today, now, we are in the 21st century. How can India increase the labor participation rate and have more women participating in the transformation? Thank you.
So again, a very important point, and the latest survey shows that women labor participation ratio has actually jumped up. And I think the only way out for that to happen is to put a huge focus on improving, learning standards of women, to ensure that they are able to get into jobs, and there's what I see in India is a huge transformation that in every competitive exam today in India, women are outperforming men. Part of the reason why women labor participation ratio had fallen down for a while was because you'd seen a huge surge in women getting into higher education. And what I personally feel is that in the coming years, you'll see this women labor participation ratio jumping up. There's a huge focus on putting women into leadership position. So the government consciously is ensuring that women get into all top positions in India. I've seen the transformation that I actually graduated from St. Stephen's College in Delhi, which was an all-male bastion. There were no girls studying there. And by the time my daughter went to the same college and the same subject, economics honors, almost 84% of the girls, 84% of the students purely on merit were all girls, on merit. And the college principal said that if you want to make sure that the college remains a co-educational college, you have to give 10% extra marks to boys. I mean, everybody laughed at him, but today, last time I checked up, 90% of on merit, 90% of the girls in that subject were all girls. So, and from IAS to every exam, the girls are doing well. So it's just a matter of time before all these women will outperform men in India.
Yeah.
I think the key thing for us is to keep focusing on improving their learning outcomes, ensuring better nutritional standards. That is the key.
Hi, my name is Divya. I'm a graduate student here at Northeastern. So my question is based on the recent incident that happened with Google and the Indian startup. Like recently, they removed the top unicorns from their Play Store because of the payment issue. And I know India stepped in immediately to get the services on the Play Store. So I feel like even though the startups are coming up, we are still being reliant of the big techs like Google Play Store and all things. I want to understand from India's government standpoint how they are backing up the startups. I'm an aspiring entrepreneur by myself, so I want to understand the support that the government has for this startup culture.
So the Indian government actually discussed this with both the startups. They discussed this with the Google, and that issue was amicably sorted out. But this is what happens when somebody is in a monopoly position. And therefore, if you have another example of PhonePe coming out with its own app store, which is launched by the minister. I was present there. And therefore, PhonePe has created its own app store, and that will build up over a period of time. Google has a monopoly.
I'll build on that. See, if the digital infrastructure is completely controlled by a few monopolies, you will have these problems. And although the digital infrastructure as it relates to the Play Store, as it relates to the advertising model, India doesn't have an alternative, right? Because that's actually the US companies. But digital infrastructure as it relates to flow of people, flow of money, and flow of information in India is public infrastructure, is DPI, digital public infrastructure. And I would submit to you that over time, the most important digital infrastructure in any country is going to be this interlocking, think of it as a triangle, flow of people, flow of money, flow of information, because this is what will inevitably, if you want to build any experience, digital experience for people, inside the government or outside, it will amount to people traveling from one company to another, money traveling from one person to another, information traveling from one place to another. If the digital infrastructure that mediates that flow is set up on the principles that we talked about, DPI, techno-legal regulation, being citizen-centric, privacy-preserving, then that digital infrastructure is going to unleash a wave of innovation that would be very, very favorable to the innovator. Are you in agreement with me? So we have legacy problems. And partly because the antitrust system hasn't worked in the last 20 years. And if you go back in time, in fact, none of these companies would have existed if 23 years ago the Microsoft antitrust had not happened, right? It is that Microsoft's monopoly on the Internet Explorer was taken away. That allowed for Google and Facebook and companies like that to exist. Otherwise, Microsoft had an investment of 15% in Facebook. They would have twisted their arm to buy that whole company. And there is no way Google would have been anything other than a tech supplier of search, which is what it was at that point in time. So therefore, antitrust has to be taken care of in every country. And we are paying for a price of not having done that well. Now, not far from here, the person who made a case for this eloquently, which I think we in India listened to him more than people here in the US, is Larry Lessig. Does that name ring a bell? In 2006, he wrote a book called Code 2.0. And that book has influenced thinking about digital in India much more than it influenced. Now, of course, people lament that they didn't pay attention to it at that time. But he asked for, looking at this kind of emerging digital monopolies and thinking of them very differently than what the country did at that time. And everybody in the world is paying a price for it. So let's do it right for AI. And I think that's the goal in the future. And the thought I want to leave with you, if at all there's one thing I can leave with you, is this is no longer the copycat era for India. If we are leaving some idea with you, we are taking Indian problems, we are listening, we are watching and seeing every good idea that is available in the world, and there is this self-confidence that is there to implement the solutions that will solve India's problems. But to do it in an open fashion, not in a controlling, closed, protectionist fashion, and to do it in a fashion that India's learnings are available to the rest of the world. So today, our ID system is being used by 17 countries, and I can tell you it'll be a much larger number in another year to come or another 5 years to come. And why is that happening is because of this spirit of openness, the spirit of sharing our learnings with the rest of the world.
Terrific. It's a very nice sort of a wrap-up as we get to the end of the session. Amitabh, do you have any final thoughts on India's growing role on the world stage?
No, my view is that there's a tremendous amount of energy and vibrancy and dynamism in India at present. Last 3 quarters, we've achieved growth rates of about 8.4%. We are the 5th largest economy in the world. By 27 end, we'll overtake Japan and Germany to be the 3rd largest economy in the world. The challenge for India is to grow rapidly year after year for 3 decades. I mean, this has been, India has achieved high growth rates for 5 to 6 years in the past. But you need to do it over a 3-decade period. And that to be done, this has been done by several countries in the past. It was done by Japan in post-World War II. It was done by Korea. In recent times, it's been done by China. And this is a huge opportunity for India because of young demographics. But there are several key challenges which India has. When many of these countries grew and expanded because the global GDP was growing and there was an export orientation to many of these countries. The global GDP has slowed down. The global exports have slowed down. There's a lot of protectionism in the world right now. But irrespective of that, India must grow rapidly. India must export more. And the challenge is to ensure that benefits of this growth go to the citizens of India. And there's growth with equity, and therefore you need to improve learning outcomes, you need to improve health outcomes, and you need to improve nutritional standards. But this is truly India's moment to accelerate the pace of its growth. And this is a great, great opportunity.
Can I say, how many of you are students here? All right. So, Ravi, when did you come to the US? Which year was?
1977.
See, he came 17 years after the US passed a law. Actually, 19 years. In 2nd September 1958, US passed a law called the National Defense Education Act, and which gave this university and other universities an ability to invite foreign graduate students to their universities. And if they gave a single line declaration that this student would qualify to be in the top half of the class, subject to audit, they got reimbursement for all the scholarships that had been offered. So those $8 Indians who came in 60 and 61, right, they were on the top half of the class. Was it any surprise that they would not be in the top half of the class 10, 15, 20, 30 years later? They were immigrants, right? Now, I want to make a case to you that given the innovation revolution that is happening in India, we've only talked about digital public infrastructure today. That's happening in telecom, that's happening in defense, that's happening in semiconductors, that's going to happen in EVs tomorrow. It's going to happen in many sectors. I would submit to you that the place to be in would be India. So I would like to point to Professor Francis Roseau from France, computer science professor, who's decided to be in Bangalore for 4 years because the epicenter of many of the things that are happening are in Bangalore. So if he can make that call, you can make that call too. And if you don't want to come back, become part of this voluntary revolution that is taking place, where you can build some of this innovation sitting where you are and contribute in a way that would be significant, and then come back and bring it to life and be the entrepreneur that he wants to be. Right? This is the time and the place to really consider that option. And I think it'll be an option where there'll be a bridge between India and the US, so you can live in two worlds if you like, but this is the time to focus on it. There's never been a time like this before.
So basically what Sharad is saying is that action is in India. Don't waste your time in Boston. Okay?
Well, that's a good way to put it. But I do hope good people will continue to be attracted to the government, because we do need great talent in the government as well, not only in the private sector. And I still am not convinced that you would have made a greater contribution in the private sector than you have made in your various roles in the public sector.
So one of the biggest contributions I made was when I was in CEO of Niti Aayog, was that I opened its portals to a lot of young people. So I brought in about, first time in government I allowed lateral entry into government. So I got 500 young professionals to work for Niti Aayog, and they really transformed Niti Aayog. It was not me. The young energy transformed Niti Aayog. So any one of you who wants to work in the government, let me know. I'll be very happy to handhold you.
That's what took me to the Planning Commission in 1974.
Yeah.
So it's the same spirit.
Yeah.
But thank you for your service, and thank you for all of the things you've done for the Indian economy.